Depends on how much time we have.
All right. Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome.
Good morning.
We're going to get started. I'm Mark Levine, Manhattan Borough President. We are here today to take on the housing crisis in New York. And you can applaud for that. We are joined by some serious housing champions. Give it up for City Council Member Sean Abreu. Yes, indeed. Give it up for City Council Member Eric Botcher. We have a constellation of advocates here. We have Anne Marie Gray from Open New York. We have Howard Slatkin from the Citizens Housing and Planning Committee Council. We have Brendan Cheney from New York Housing Conference, and a representative of the Regional Planning Association. Applaud for RPA. We like them. Come on, guys. And we got a major policy brain here, Alex Armlovich from the Niskanen Center. Thank you so much. Now, this might seem like a normal press conference, but it is actually radical. You have never in history before seen elected officials in Manhattan demanding that Albany let us build larger apartment buildings. But it's happening now because we are in a crisis, and politics must change in this borough to meet this moment when rents here are averaging $5,000 per month, when the median cost of a home to purchase is $1.25 million. We are going to lose an entire generation of New Yorkers, low-income families, working-class families, even middle-class families, if we do not deal with this housing affordability crisis. Now, you might say, why don't you just build bigger apartment buildings so we have more apartments and more affordable apartments? The answer is that Albany won't let us, because of a law that I think most New Yorkers would be shocked to know even exists, known as the 12 FAR cap, which roughly says you can only have floor area that is equivalent to 12 times the lot size. So if you fill out the lot, 12 floors. And that law's been in place since 1961. Look around the city and you'll see many apartment buildings with more floor area than that. Some of the most beloved in the city, all along Central Park West. These glorious historic apartment buildings. They're beautiful, aren't they? Everyone would be illegal to build today. Everyone is considered too big by the current standards of this law in Albany. And this is not just about lamenting what is probably more than 100,000 homes that we didn't build in this city since 1961. This is also about our current fight. We got vacant office buildings in Midtown Manhattan. Those can and should be converted to housing. But many of those buildings have much greater floor area than just 12 FAR. So if we convert them, under the current rules, we would have to leave them half vacant or only fill half of those buildings with housing. And even new development, we have a vacant lot right next to Javits Center. Large lot, known as Site K. Currently slated to get a building probably 60 stories tall. Under the current cap that Albany has posed, that building will only fill up half with housing. I don't know what the rest of it is. This is crazy. This is crazy policy. Maybe it made sense in 1961. From what I hear, they were actually worried about too much housing being built, hard to believe, and not enough offices. We have exactly the opposite problem today. This policy is indefensible in 2024. Now, you've seen us at press conferences where we demand that Albany invest funding in a good program, or maybe we demand that Albany use its tax code in some helpful way, including for housing. That is not this press conference. All we are asking from Albany is that you get out of our way, that you allow us to address the housing affordability crisis in New York. There's only one state in the country which imposes a cap on the housing that local governments create. It's only New York. That's it. And if I have to hear one more time from a leader in Albany preaching about local control related to their housing fights in Long Island or wherever, and turn around and defend imposing a cap against the will of us here in New York, I think I'm going to scream. We're not going to take this anymore. We have a very simple demand. Lift the 12 FAR cap so we can build the housing that Manhattanites need. Thank you very much. All right. And now next up, the representative of the 7th Council District, the district with an illustrious history. He's doing way better than his predecessor.
It's not true.
Please join me in welcoming Councilmember Sean Abreu. Thank you so much, everybody.
Well, thank you, Mr. Borough President, and for being really the housing champion that this city desperately deserves. We are so grateful for your leadership. We need to lift the 12 FAR. It is very important that New York City be able to build as much housing as necessary to make sure that working class families have a home. There is no surprise that the price of rent is skyrocketing because there's not enough housing. It's that plain and simple. And in New York City and in Manhattan specifically, we want to build housing without limitation. There should be no limit on how much housing we provide for our families. There should be no limit in the possibilities of having a home. And we're proud to say here that Manhattanites, our Manhattan Borough President, our council members, we have a very strong delegation, and it's telling Albany, just let us do what we need to do to build housing, and that's our simple call. I'm part of that call. We're part of that call. Let's bring it home, everybody.
All right, thank you, thank you, thank you. Next up, an absolutely fearless housing champion, my friend, my partner, Councilmember Eric Botcher.
Thank you so much. Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine, thank you once again for your leadership in bringing us here together, because leadership is not saying what everyone always agrees with. Leadership is not repeating slogans that sound great and that get big applause lines. Leadership is doing what's right and imploring others to do what's right and using all the tools at your disposal to get the right things done, even when they're tough, even when they're hard, and even when they're not popular right out of the gate with a lot of people. Because if it was popular, it would have been done a long time ago.
Yep.
It would have been done a long time ago. And what we're talking today is this relic of the 1960s, which is this 12 FAR cap that applies only to residential buildings, not commercial buildings. Look at the skyline. See commercial buildings, very big commercial buildings. Doesn't apply to residential buildings. There's a few misstatements that keep being said about the 12 FAR cap that are really holding back progress. One is that it would override local zoning, and that is not accurate. Local zoning would still apply. What we're talking about is when the local zoning allows it, allowing a building to be built that is of a certain bulk, like these famous buildings here today that could not be allowed to be built today. Another misstatement that keeps being said about the 12 FAR cap is these pencil buildings on the skyline, these residential buildings that are pencil thin, that it would allow for buildings like that. Those buildings comply with the 12 FAR cap. Those buildings are a product of the 12 FAR cap, because by limiting the bulk of these buildings, developers are amassing lots and building tall and skinny instead of short and squat and bulky with lots and lots of apartments. They're building tall and skinny with one apartment on each floor. So you've got a building like that atrocious building on Fifth Avenue that blocks the Empire State Building and has destroyed one of the best views in the planet. That apartment building has 26 apartments in it. What is that doing to help alleviate the housing crisis? That is a product of this artificial cap on residential buildings. We want buildings that are residential buildings that are large and squat and take up a big lot with hundreds of apartments, studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, apartments for working New Yorkers. Al Gore's documentary, The Inconvenient Truth, is called An Inconvenient Truth because when we talk about climate change, we are confronting very difficult realities that we'd prefer to turn away from. The way we've been living, the way we've been developing the world, the way that we've been consuming, the way that we've been fueling everything that we use has been destroying the planet. And the inconvenient truth is that we have to address that, and it's going to be hard. It's going to require tough stuff like Local Law 97 that forces buildings to reduce emissions. When it comes to housing, we don't seem to want to acknowledge the inconvenient truth that we haven't been producing nearly enough housing for the growth of population in New York City over the decades, and that we're going to have to change the way that we as a society grow our housing stock. We're going to have to change our development patterns and switch to transit-oriented development and build hundreds of thousands of units of housing in New York State for people of all incomes. Very low income, supportive housing, middle income housing, and market rate housing. And enough market rate housing to bring down the cost for everyone, because I don't think you should have to win a lottery to get an affordable apartment in New York City. You shouldn't have to win a lottery to find an apartment that you can afford. You should be able to go out and look at a bunch of apartments that fit your budget and pick the one you like best. I remember when that was true in New York City. When I moved to New York City in 2001, that was true. We can have that again, but if we continue the status quo, if we continue killing every effort to increase housing supply, not only are we going to continue the crisis that we have, the levels of homelessness that we're seeing now are going to seem quaint in a few years. The levels of crime, of mental illness, of poverty, of displacement, of gentrification, all these things are going to continue to get worse. And that's a dark future for the future of New York that I refuse to let happen. The alternative is we embrace what we know to be true, what other municipalities around the world and around the country have done, and build hundreds of thousands of homes, bring down rents for everyone, and have a city and a state that are affordable for everyone. This FAR cap is a barrier to that. One last example I want to give is, in our district, we have commercial office buildings that will hopefully be converted to residential. We can't convert the whole office building to residential because that would be in violation of the FAR cap. So we're looking at, we're going to do half residential, half commercial. Why? We should be able to convert the whole building to residential. Let's get this done in this session in Albany. The future of New York literally depends on it. I implore all our colleagues in state government to take up this cause in the next few weeks. This is when negotiations are happening right now in Albany. Thank you, Borough President Levine. Thank you, Councilmember Abreu. Thank you to all the advocates who are here. Let's go get this done.
All right. Woo. Thank you. I sure hope someone caught that on video. We actually have no fewer than 7 council members who have signed the letter that we're putting out this morning calling for the lifting of the cap. 7 out of the 10 Manhattan council members. I want to call them out. We got Councilmember Carlina Rivera, Councilmember Keith Powers, Councilmember Julie Menon, Councilmember Diana Ayala, Councilmember Yusuf Salam. Can we give them all a big round of applause in addition to these 2 great leaders? Now, I said it before, unprecedented. 7 of the 10 council members in Manhattan have called for the lifting of the 12 FAR cap. That, first of all, says a lot about them as brave leaders. It says a lot about the severity of this crisis, and also it's a marker of how the politics are shifting on housing in New York. There is no point in history when you could have gotten 7 of the 10 council members to call for lifting of the 12 FAR cap. And it's thanks in part to the work of a lot of the advocates who are here.
And to you, Mark.
And I had a little something to do with it. Team effort. Speaking of advocates, I would like to now call up the executive director of Open New York, Anne Marie Gray. All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Borough President. Thank you, council members. I think it is an unbelievably exciting moment for the amount of momentum and just positivity we have in standing behind elected officials representing, frankly, some of the most centrally located, some of the wealthiest parts of the country, frankly, of the world, saying that our housing affordability crisis is rooted in the fact that we just are not building enough homes, and everywhere has a really important role to play. And it's really, really important to remember parts of Manhattan have seen not no growth, net housing loss, actually, in the last decade. When combined with apartment consolidations and the fact that we're just not building hardly anything. And so this is, displacement, exclusion, segregation, tenant harassment, eviction, homelessness are all exacerbated by a dire housing shortage that is really existential for the future of the city. I lead an organization representing over 500 members across the city and state who are really, really suffering with this today, and being part of a coalition of all of the different approaches that we need. Because this is not an inevitability, it's a policy choice. The FAR cap is an outdated rule that directly limits new affordable housing production. And lifting it is one of the many, many steps that we need as soon as possible this session for elected officials to take that add more homes, add permanently affordable homes in the borough's most well-connected, wealthiest neighborhoods. So we need an all-of-the-above approach to housing. We need all of our elected leaders at the city level, at the state level, working together constantly, year after year after year, passing every reform that we need to build more homes of all types, especially permanently affordable homes, for the foreseeable future. And it's really, really great to be here with elected officials directly calling for that and really standing up and saying that. So thank you.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Thank you so much. Next up, Howard Slatkin, the executive director of the Citizens Housing and Planning Council. Got it right this time. Come on up, Howard. Thank you. Thank you.
There are some issues when it comes to housing and planning that are complicated. This is not one of them. As Councilmember Botcher described a couple of minutes ago, this is a law that has been in place since the 1960s, when the vision for how we should live was suburbia. It was about towers in the park in New York City and rebuilding the city in the image of the suburbs. It was a deeply pessimistic time about the future of cities. It was a deeply different time from today, when our core challenge is that we simply don't have enough homes for people to live in New York City. And it's simply indefensible to keep on the books a rule that ties the hands of New York City's elected officials who want to try to provide more housing in Manhattan, in New York City. This rule dates to a time when we saw new housing in New York City as part of the problem. We know that new housing in New York City is part of the solution, and I really want to applaud all the council members and Borough President Levine for bringing everyone together today to focus our attention on that. This is the time to eliminate this archaic, counterproductive law, to untie the hands of New York City government to solve its own problems, and let's do it.
All right, thank you, Brendan. All right, next up, I'd like to ask Brendan Cheney from the New York Housing Conference to join us. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Borough President Levine. Thank you to the council members. So we are in a housing crisis, and the numbers are staggering, and they're getting worse every year. More than 145,000 people are staying in our city shelters at night. The vacancy rate in the latest housing and vacancy survey was just 1.4% here in the city. 2/3 of renters making under $100,000 in New York City are rent burdened. And we're not building enough housing to keep up. From 2021 to 2023, the city's housing stock grew by just 60,000 units, while the city added 275,000 new households. So a housing crisis that existed 3 years ago is getting worse because we continue to not build enough housing. We know that people are leaving the state because housing is unaffordable. It's harder for young single people to find housing and start a life here. It's hard for seniors to age in place with affordable housing. And it's hard for families to find housing and stay here in the city. There's two solutions to this crisis. One is building more subsidized affordable housing. And we're doing this through state and city housing plans. We continue to advocate for more funding, for more subsidies. But that's one solution, to build more housing for low-income New Yorkers. It's desperately needed. The second is just building more housing generally. We know the crisis is affecting most incomes in the city and most people, so we just need more housing supply. And we know that subsidized affordable housing cannot build the supply we need alone. We need to allow the market to build a lot more housing. So, we need to promote housing growth, but at the very least, we need to remove barriers to adding new housing. Having an arbitrary state-imposed density on housing is bad policy. It is particularly bad policy in a housing crisis. The state should remove the arbitrary FAR cap for New York City and allow the city to set appropriate zoning and density to allow for more housing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brendan. Next up, we have from the Regional Planning Association, Marcel Negrete.
Hello, my name is Marcel Negrete. I'm a senior planner with the Regional Planning Association. We want to thank the council members, the leadership of the borough president in this issue. I'm representing an organization that advocates for the more affordable and better New York City metro area. And the RPA has been calling for lifting the FAR cap for about 10 years since the release, prior to the release of its fourth regional plan. Has been mentioned by many others. This is an outdated law that restricts residential buildings to an FAR of 12. And repealing this cap is a significant step to deliver more types of housing that New Yorkers desperately need. RPA estimates that if the 12 FAR cap is removed and high-rise neighborhoods are met with inclusionary zoning, New York City could unlock over 30,000 units of income-restricted housing. But those are not allowed under the current cap. Because most high-rise zoning districts in the city are located in wealthier areas with good access to jobs and transit, and they are already at near their FAR limits. This impedes the ability for the city to map inclusionary zoning as a way to require and incentivize income-restricted housing. So repealing this cap would allow for the city to decide for itself how much residential floor area buildings should have, and how much new affordable housing could be required on future development sites. This is especially important as we consider the implications of office vacancies and the opportunity to office to residential conversions that are here with us today. And it's an important opportunity that we need to take advantage of. Importantly also, the city's Uniform Land Use Review procedure, known as ULURP, would be needed for places that remove this cap. So this ensures that inclusionary zoning and contextual regulations lead to better architecture and more affordable housing that we're not currently seeing today. Because of many of these reasons, we think that Albany must act accordingly. Again, thank you so much for the council members and all the other advocates.
Thank you, Marcel. Thank you so much. Councilmember Botcher and I were just blown away by a stat you said, so I want to make sure we got this right. I think you said that we could potentially unlock the creation of 30,000 affordable apartments with MIH if we lift the cap. That is massive impact, absolutely massive. This is why you got to invite policy experts to your press conferences. Speaking of which, we have a nationally renowned housing policy expert in Alex Armlevich from the Niskanen Center, and you get to close us out. Come on up, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to represent the Niskanen Center. I'm the housing policy manager at the Niskanen Center, a DC-based think tank And we focus a lot on both national housing policy, as my friend Mark was saying, but also state level policy. And my friends on the Hill, they asked me, if you focus on federal and state policy, why are you at a city press conference, right? Well, the thing is, New York City is about the size of Virginia. New York City is larger than 38 of the 50 states. So what happens in New York City is as important as any of our other state level campaigns. And the thing that's very interesting about the FAR cap is that it's a potent reminder that state government actually holds the power to zone, and it is delegated to localities kind of at the pleasure of the state, including the ability to put guardrails on that zoning. So the FAR cap, it's essentially a preemption of New York City zoning, long-standing since 1961, but it's a preemption that reflects 1961 assumptions that the general welfare of the state would be advanced by suppressing growth in the city and encouraging suburbanization. But obviously, conditions since 1961 have changed a lot. We have a housing crisis in the core. We have a dire need to rebuild the MTA's transit ridership, both for climate reasons and for sound fiscal reasons, and just generally to restore the economic vitality of this enormous economic powerhouse. So it's a funny thing happens when you talk to policymakers in Albany. If you bring up something like the housing compact, they'll tell you, "Oh, I'm sorry, I know we have a housing crisis, but local control, it's just sacrosanct. There's nothing we can do." And I say, it's so funny you mentioned that. Could you help us in lifting the FAR 12 cap, this ancient preemption on New York City zoning? And then suddenly the tone changes and they say, "How dare you challenge the FAR cap? Albany decides how large buildings in New York City will be." It's very interesting. And so the least that we can do is give New York City the power to control its own zoning in a pro-growth direction. We need to update state preemptions for the 21st century, not for 1961. But I really appreciate the leadership of my friends and colleagues on this fine coalition, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Alex. All right, wow, we closed out strong. So we're gonna wrap up, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We got, 2 weeks to get this done?
That's right.
Let's push hard and lift this cap once and for all. Thanks so much, everybody. All right. Good work. Good work.